Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and today we welcome author Paula Yu to The Stacks. Paula has just released her new YA nonfiction book, Rising from the Ashes, Los Angeles, 1992, Edward J. Song Lee, Latasha Harlins, Rodney King, and a City on Fire. The book is a stunning account of the racial tensions in Los Angeles that fueled the 1992 uprisings after the acquittal of the officers who beat Rodney King, along with a strong focus on the experiences and relationships of Korean and Black Angelenos. Paula and I talked today about why I'm obsessed with this event, why she's writing historical nonfiction for young people, and how she teaches her readers without being condescending. I really love this book, and I hope that you get it for yourself and for young people in your life. Don't forget, the Stacks Book Club pick for May is James Baldwin's No Name in the Street. We will discuss that book on May 29th with Yadon Israel. Everything we talk about on each episode of The Stacks can be found in the link in the show notes. And if you love The Stacks and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks and join the Stacks Pack. It's just $5 a month, and you get to be part of the best bookish community in the history of the universe. I cannot back that up with fact, but I can back that up with feeling. We do things like our monthly virtual book club. We have a kick-ass Discord community. We do bonus episodes each month. And you get to know that by joining the Stacks Pack, you make it possible for me to make this show every single week. Another perk that I love is I get to shout out the newest members of the Stacks Pack here on the show. So here's a huge thank you to Michelle Mertz, Marianne, Tanya, Kat Connell, Michelle Best, and Lauren Mather. Thank you all so much for being part of the Stacks Pack. I could not make the show without you. And if you're like, I don't really want to be part of a Patreon community, but I still want to support the Stacks, you can find out what I'm up to, check out what I've been reading, see what I've got coming up, all of that stuff. Stay in the loop of the Stacks by going to tracythomas.substack.com and subscribing to my newsletter, Unstacked. Whew. Now it's time for my conversation with Paula Yu. All right, everybody, I am very excited today. I am joined by author Paula Yu. Her newest book is called Rising from the Ashes, Los Angeles, 1992. Edward J. Song Lee, Latasha Harlins, Rodney King, and a City on Fire. And let me just say, these events in 1992 are perhaps the most important events to me in my entire life. So the fact that this book exists is just so exciting to me. And Paul, I'm so glad you're here. So welcome to the Stacks.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so for people who don't know, I mean, I think that the title pretty much tells you the gist of the book, but for people who don't know, in about 30 seconds, can you tell us about the book?
Of course. Rising from the Ashes is a nonfiction narrative young adult book about the 1992 Los Angeles uprising. But what makes it different from other books is that I focus specifically on what happened in Koreatown and the relationship between the Korean American and Black communities before, during, and after the civil unrest. And I also take a step back and look at the larger historical events that led up to what happened in both 1991 and 1992. And the reason why I focus on the three families is because I wanted to celebrate the lives of Eddie, Tasha, and Glenn and their legacy, and to make the story more personal. So it's about how these three families' lives are actually very interwoven and connected beyond ways than any of them could imagine. And also, I just wanted to show what happened to their loved ones afterwards and the resilience, courage, and also especially the compassion and empathy they showed afterwards.
Yeah, I really loved this book. I loved your book about Vincent Chen. I love nonfiction. And as a kid, I read a lot of adult books. There weren't a lot of nonfiction books as like about the things I was interested in. I felt like as a kid, the options were like read about dinosaurs or read like a novel. And so I was, finding other things to read about. But what I love about your books, these books that are like talking about these huge cultural moments that were so groundbreaking for people, is that you're directing them to this next generation. And so I'm curious, especially with this one, do you have a sense of if young people even know about the events of 1992? Like, is this even on their radar?
Absolutely not. A lot of them
Okay.
don't know. I mean, when George, which is shocking. I'm a Gen Xer, so I was
Right. And I'm a millennial. So
uh-huh.
this was like when I was a kid, this happened,
Hmm.
and it like scared the shit out of me. Right. Like I was
Oh,
really young and it was really scary. And so I was like, I bet kids don't even know.
I can't. And first of all, I'm sorry that it scared you because I can't imagine being that young because the fires, the violence that was happening, the lack of control and the way the city just shut down. And this actually transpired across the country. There were protests and similar things happening in other cities across the country, all the way to the East Coast. Rodney King's daughter, Laura, was only 8 years old. I mean, she
Ugh.
was a child. She was very close to your age. And so imagine
Yeah.
how she felt.
Yeah.
And actually, I was 23 and I was wrapping up my master's in journalism at Columbia University in New York. So I was as far away as you could be, but
Yeah.
it affected us over there as well.
I'm sure.
I already forgot the first part of the question. So of course, kids are not going to remember what happened 30 years ago. In fact, we celebrated or we acknowledged the 30th anniversary just recently in 2022. And in fact, we now have a whole generation that was born after 9/11, after all these
Right.
events. And I remember when George Floyd happened and the Black Lives Matter protests happened across the country. A lot of times people brought up, oh, this reminds us of Rodney King. And I remember my husband is a seventh grade math teacher. A lot of the kids were saying things like, oh, he's the OG, Rodney King is the OG, George Floyd. So I think that, and I think that also the concept of video cameras back then
Yeah.
were starting to become just as prevalent as iPhones. And I think
Yeah.
that that's a little bit of a disconnect for today's teenagers and kids because they're used to iPhones, but they don't
Yeah.
understand that for us, growing up, the video camera was basically our iPhone. And so that culture has always existed, but I think that just the technology has gotten smaller. You can carry it in your pocket now.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many moments about technology in this book that like flared for me. There's the scene once everything starts happening and we've got these photojournalists who are down at Florence and Normandy, and one of them, of course, goes into a into a phone booth when I'm like, ha ha ha, these kids have no idea. But the other one is it's like I had to replenish his film. So one photographer's like, here, take this film back to like the LA Times, and I'm gonna stay out here, and here's a whole like case of film. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, kids are like, what are they talking about? Like I forgot. Of course they had film back then. Of course there was like stuff that they had to carry with them to get these shots. They weren't just like filming on their iPhones or snapping pictures, unlimited pictures. They were like really trying to be economical and make sure they could carry everything and get out safely with the film.
Yes, exactly. Photographers back then, photojournalists were actual witnesses. They were basically like war correspondents. They were using their words were their photos. And because they had a limited supply of film, they carried around these heavy bags too, and the large telephoto
Yeah.
lens and things like that. They had to, as with writers, be judicious. And to really make sure that they were capturing important moments. So they weren't just click, 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 click. They were actually looking for stories and looking for what can I show that's important that our readers need to know about. And I do think the good thing, though, is that today's kids, a lot of them do know about old-fashioned photography with dark rooms and chemical baths and things like that, because that's actually making a comeback.
Yeah.
It's because I think kids are fascinated by taking more of your time and really figuring
Mhm.
out storytelling. My voice, the way I tell a story, my perspective is through a camera lens. How can and you see that in the voices of young people making TikTok videos or stuff that they
Yeah.
post on social media. So I think it's really lovely that there's a new generation of kids who are kind of think it's cool and they're going back to old fashioned photography. But I do think that
Right.
it also shows even though they didn't have iPhones back then, there still was a sense of urgency. And the fact that these photos were published the very
Yeah.
next day, that
Yeah.
was huge. That was huge.
Incredible. I can relate, I think, to like young people who maybe don't know this story, because when I read your book, From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, about the murder of Vincent Chen, I had never heard that story. that had never come across. And that's the kind of thing that I become obsessed with. After I finished the book, I did like so many deep dives on like all these Google searches. Like I was like down all the rabbit holes. But that's what I think I really love about what you do, is that you bring these stories that if you're from a certain community or if you were born at a certain time are like canon to your life. But if you weren't, it maybe never has crossed your mind. And it's like, these stories are important too. And not every event that we learn about in schools or not every person we learn about in school is the whole story. And like, it's just such a good reminder. And I'm curious sort of how you decide what you want to write about, how you knew you wanted to write about Vincent Chen, or how you knew you wanted to write about the uprisings.
Well, that's a really great question. And thank you so much. I think what it is I want to write stories that haven't been told before, from communities whose stories have been erased, from voices that have been silenced, because we always hear about these events from the majority default mainstream white point of view.
Right.
We don't, the Koreatown burning down and the Korean American community during the 1992 LA uprising. Our story was basically a sidebar. We weren't the main characters. We were minor supporting role characters when there was a disproportionate percentage of the $1 billion in damage. Over 47% was in Koreatown. Disproportionate. Yet nobody ever talked about us. We were just a sidebar.
Right.
We were brushed aside, but we were a very important part of that story. And with Vincent Chin, I knew about him in college because the documentary Who Killed Vincent Chin had come out. And I remember being shocked and horrified and also fascinated by the story. So when I choose these topics, I think to myself, what would I have wanted to have read back when I was a teenager so that I wouldn't have to learn all this stuff after I graduated from school? It's a shame that people, Generation X, Asian American, Pacific Islanders like myself, we had to go to the library after we graduated from high school, after we got our free public education. I had to spend money to learn about my own history. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of why I write these books, because I wanted to say, hey, there's another side that deserves to be told. So that's why I choose the stories that I do. And I think also too, aside from just the fact that I do focus on Asian American history, because I want to fill a void. It's also just emotional. For me, it is about character and emotion. So at the end of the day, actually, none of these people that I write about, they don't have to be Korean American or Chinese American or anyone of Asian descent. They could be any other character, because it's what moves me. And it's about the universality of our human experience. And as people of color, as Black and people of color and Asian AAPI people, we're raised to live in both worlds in this country. Mm-hmm. We kind of straddle the gap in both worlds. They talk a lot about code switching, but other people don't have to do that. So they don't know how to code switch like we do. And it's a shame, because what that means is the other half, they don't see our stories as universal because they were never taught that our stories are universal. So by doing these stories, I hope I remind people that you don't have to be Korean American or Black to read my book about the LA 1992 uprising. You don't have to be Chinese American to read about Vincent Chin. You can be whatever you are. You can relate to this because this could have happened to you.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you a little bit about sort of the relationship between the Black and Korean communities, because in the book, and just in the history of the story, we have the murder of Latasha Harlins that happens in 1991, and she is killed by a Korean shop owner who there's an altercation, there is a killing, and there is a very unjust sort of legal proceeding that happens afterwards. And that is sort of, I think people will talk about like as the kindling to the fire that ends up becoming the 1992 uprisings. In addition to that, a lot of the damage takes place in Koreatown, as you've mentioned. There's a lot of like stoking of the fire by white mainstream media, specifically the LA Times, but I think broadly just mainstream white media. And then we flash forward to summer 2020, 2021, and we have the Stop AAPI Hate, and we have the Black Lives Matter movement, and we sort of have this like tension in these two communities again in a way that feels like public. And I'm curious sort of your thoughts on like where are we now? I know there was the Black Korean Alliance that you talk about in the book that sort of disbanded after these events for multiple reasons. But I'm sort of curious, like, what is this vibe between the two communities, specifically here in LA, but maybe broadly nationally? What's your sense?
That's how much time do we have? So
I know that's sort of a tough question,
yeah.
but I think it's important to all of this.
No, it's an important topic that deserves not to be a soundbite. So I'm going to take my time as I explain this.
Do.
So going back, one of the things is, they talk about, is there anti-Blackness in the Korean American community, the Korean community, and also other Asian American communities and also Asian countries? Of course there is, but that's because of white supremacy and systemic racism. And you think about the majority, the plethora of anti-Black images that have been perpetuated throughout popular media that influence, how Black lives are portrayed on screen, in the news, disproportionate amount of negativity, of stereotypes. Mm-hmm. So you have that. But having said that, growing up, even though I and my family saw a lot of negative media, we were smart. We're like, okay, this is stereotypes. I'm not gonna, there are plenty, just for as many people that get influenced by this and become anti-Black or prejudiced, there are just as many, if not more people that say, wait a minute, I'm a little suspicious of what's going on here about what I'm not going to be spoon-fed this. So we have to remember that there is another proportion of, our communities that don't believe the hype. Right. And it's the same thing with the Black community. There is a lot of, is there anti-Asian xenophobia? Is there yellow fever, as we call it, in the Black community, just like it exists in the white community? Of course there is, because a lot of times, all anyone ever saw was Bruce Lee or submissive Asian, the Oriental submissive woman in media. Right. So that would influence both the Black and white and all non-Asian communities to think of our communities in a certain negative light as well. So already you've got this awful mess, this foundation that's already very shaky. And then on top of it, what people never talk about is the positive stuff. The fact that Asian Americans marched with the Black Panther Party in the 1960s. In fact, the term Asian American was coined in Berkeley by radical students in 1968 to support the Black Panther Party. And that was considered a political term for college radicals. And today, because of Vincent Chin in 1982, it became a mainstream topic. And I know that the language is always evolving. So now we have Asian American Pacific Islander. We have many different, the term is always evolving, but Asian American itself by definition is actually just a political term. And it's to say that we believe in promoting our issues in our community and to fight against anti-Asian racism, but also we are here in solidarity for the Black community, for all different types of communities. Right. So you have that. And then you also have other stories that are so fascinating. Things like, there's a place in the Delta, Missouri, I think it's Missouri, there's a Chinese American and Black American town that's been around for centuries. That people don't know about, where they all kind of grew up together because they were all ostracized from living in white towns. So you have these communities, and I even talk about it with the Black customers that loved their Korean store owners and protected their stores. I interviewed Korean American store owners and Korean immigrant store owners who had barbecues for their Black customers. Right. They didn't follow.
I loved those scenes.
Yeah, thank you. And they didn't follow them around the store thinking that they were going to steal something, Right. So basically I think what I'm saying, and forgive me, it's a hard topic. Yeah. White supremacy, systemic racism, racist images perpetuated in the media. Yes, that can influence people to be anti-Black or anti-Asian, but it's not an excuse.
Yeah.
Do better, be better, learn better. Don't be spoon-fed this stuff. Having said that, the coverage, as you talked about, through the national media, especially the mainstream white media, it's a sexy story. That kind of conflict sells, and it's much easier, and it's also lazier for newspapers and the media to focus on, oh, hey, the blacks can't stand the Koreans are prejudiced against the blacks. Let's just focus on that instead of examining the elephant in the room, which is systemic racism and, decades of oppression through racist housing covenants, food deserts, highways that split, middle-class black neighborhoods.
Right.
The fact that Korean immigrants were coming here from the war, not aware that they were entering a country that was also in a civil war, with the DMZ actually being the 10 freeway splitting black, and they were entering another combat zone they were not even educated about. So you see how hard it was for me to even encapsulate all of that.
Yeah.
Why you can't put that in a headline? Much easier just to blame our communities and write some sensationalistic media, which the LA Times, to their credit, and many other newspapers of the record apologized in 2020. During the Black Lives Matter protests, the LA Times published a mea culpa saying, hey, let's look at the history of racism and how we covered communities of color and how we promise to do better. And here are the steps that we're doing to be more accountable and to include more diverse coverage, So I do think that we are making improvements. We have new information in my book. The Harlan's family has been working with a Korean church because there's a Korean church tapestry in downtown LA. They started a program called Convergence, where it's a think tank where they're helping develop and nurture and mentor Black business owners, with experienced veterans in the business community to help mentor them. And Shanice Harlan's, who is Latasha Harlan's cousin, ended up getting accepted into the program. They didn't know she was applying. They didn't know about her history.
Right. She
just had a fantastic application, and they're like, this is great. Let's bring her into the program. And coincidentally, they paired her up with David Lin, whom I interviewed in my book. He is a business entrepreneur and advocate, and he does a lot of mentoring for business owners. And coincidentally, in 1992, he volunteered to help clean up the streets of Compton and Watts and Koreatown after the rioting and looting and protesting and violence had ended. And so I interviewed him, and then he was mentoring this program. And who happens to be his mentee who was assigned to him? Latasha Harlan's cousin.
It's
and
incredible.
They had and the reason why I bring up such specific stories is because we can talk statistics. We can talk about Rebuild LA. There's still parts of Compton and Watts and parts of South LA that are still just as devastated as they were in 1992. That's still a problem. We've got to work on that. I can talk about statistics and all of that. But to me, what's more important is it's one seed that plants a crop. So it's David and Shanice getting together. It's not just all these activists that are working together. So it's the personal stories. So that's what I focused in my book. It's that because it really is, it goes down to the grassroots, personal relationships. Because I hate to say it, our system's still broken. We have a broken justice system. We have our media is trying to scramble to make up for decades, if not centuries, of not enough diversity, equity, inclusion in their newsrooms. We can talk about that as well later, because I do want to talk about that. And just going back to the justice system as well. When we talk about what happened to Vincent Chin and his killers pled guilty, were found guilty of manslaughter, but got away with just a few years probation and a very minimal fine. Same thing happened to Sun Ja-du, who shot and killed Latasha Harlins. I do want to say something, though. I just did jury duty a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things they say is, you're not there to judge the actual defendant. You're there to judge whether the prosecutor did their job in proving beyond a reasonable doubt that this person is guilty. So then you think, if the responsibility is with that prosecutor, and then the responsibility goes to the judge who makes the sentencing, you're now dealing with a system of mostly male, mostly white back in the day. And even today, there's more diversity now, but it's still a majority white male default system. You are asking people like this to mete out judgment and fair sentencing and judgments. So at the end of the day, it was Judge Charles Kaufman who said, you know what, Ronald Ebens and Michael Nitz, they've never broken the law before. I feel mercy for them. This is why I'm giving the sentence. You have with Sun Ja-du and Latasha Harlins, you have a white woman, Judge Joyce Carlin say, you know what, $500 fine to cover funeral costs and just a few years of probation. And in fact, had Latasha survived, maybe she would be here on trial for attacking Mrs. Dew. So Mrs. Dew never said that. In all fairness, what was interesting about that trial was that race was never a factor. I read all 500 pages of the court transcript. It was technically about the gun, the fact that it was a gun that had been stolen and the trigger had been shaved down, so it was a hair trigger. Mrs. Dew didn't know how to handle a gun. We also have Latasha Harlan's an innocent. Just that she's a child. She's 15 years old.
15.
She's trying to protect her cousin Shanice's backpack. So, if a grown-up, if a stranger grabs your family member's backpack, they're just like, no, it's scary,
Yeah.
And so this judge is putting her lens, her perspective, her confirmation bias. So Mrs. Dew didn't say, I only want to pay $500 and I don't want to serve jail time. Mrs. Dew admitted remorse. Ronald Evans admitted remorse. These are human beings. And not once did the Dew family ever say anything negative or racist against the Black community. Did they follow a lot of people around? Were they suspicious? Yes, but people don't understand that there were, I think they had gotten robbed at gunpoint 30 times that month. They were traumatized. Yeah. That's not an excuse, but you have to understand what led to that type of traumatic PTSD behavior, So basically, I think what I'm saying is that we have to look at the justice system, Yes. And also the other thing I wanted to say was emphatically, and Shanice Harlan's told me this, Latasha Harlan's and the children and the Harlan's family, they were not anti-Asian. They were not anti-Korean. In fact, there was another store they went to that was owned by a Korean couple that they loved. They went there all the time. The only reason Latasha stopped by Empire Liquor was because it was on the way home. It was just a horrible coincidence, She normally went to the other store. So it was never about, they never once said that they hated Koreans. The Dew family never once said they hated Black people. But the judge, a white woman, made it about race.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Valentine's Day is upon us and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh, of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. Okay, we're back. I do want to come back and talk about the media. I want to start with where you kind of led us to about the LA Times and their mea culpa. What have they actually done since? Anything? Or are they actually still working towards that? Or is this another sort of casualty of the 2020, I'm so sorry, we're racist, we'll do better, and then nobody checks back in?
Very good question. And I will say, I am a former journalist. I wrote for the
Okay.
Detroit News, the Seattle
That's
Times,
right.
People Magazine, and I have a lot of friends and in fact, I actually just spoke at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books and had a
Yes, we
wonderful
were there
time.
together.
Yeah, I know. It was so much fun. So I do thank the LA Times for that. What happened was I want to take a step back and go to 1965. During the
Yes.
Watts Rebellion, the mostly white, mostly male newsroom at the LA Times realized, we don't have any black reporters. So they found a young 24-year-old black man named Robert Richardson. He worked in advertising. They said, hey, here's a notebook. Can you go to Watson Compton and tell us what's going on? So he, no training, nothing, went out there and he would file dispatches. He would go into the ancient telephone booth and call the LA Times newsroom and tell his stories. He would say, okay, this is happening, this is happening. And he was the reporter that heard people shout, burn, baby, burn, which was the famous battle cry that was happening at Watts during that time. So he's responsible. Had he never gone out there, we wouldn't
have it.
mainstream. The black newspapers knew, the black owned radio stations, they knew about Burn Baby Burn, but the white mainstream media didn't know about that. So he then was promoted to reporter trainee. And, and this was something that the LA Times learned. They realized, we need more diverse voices to help us cover future events. Now, I do want to say with Robert Richardson, the very sad thing was he had a very difficult life. He was battling alcoholism. He ended up dying at still very young. Only in 2000, he passed away from an asthma attack. And when the LA Times won the Pulitzer for their 1965 coverage of the Watts Rebellion, he didn't want to attend the ceremony because he felt he didn't deserve it. And think about that. Think about the system that caused him not to have pride in being a groundbreaking reporter.
Yeah.
So let's flash forward almost 30 years later. It's 1992. Same thing is happening. There was one full-time Korean American reporter named John H. Lee. He was in the San Diego bureau. They said, can you drive up as fast as you can? So he drives up. His mom is, he's calling his mom who's listening, who's glued to Radio Korea, giving him story tips saying, on Korean radio, they're saying this, and so his mom is a de facto reporter as well.
Right.
And then Hyung-Won Kang, who won the Pulitzer Prize for taking photos of Koreatown and of what was happening in Los Angeles, he also kind of became a reporter. He was a photojournalist and was in charge of editing photo. He was in the South Bay office. He too kind of became not just a photographer, but a journalist. And then they all went to the editor's office and said, we need more Korean people who can speak the language and can help translate. So the LA Times at the last minute had to recruit and fly down Kay Connie Kong, an influential. She was the first Korean American journalist in America in the early 1960s. So we had to basically import her from San Francisco to help. And then she got hired full time. And they said, so then they realized their mistakes. So she wrote many award-winning articles about the Korean American community. And she sadly passed away recently as well. So that was the mistake there. But you think they would have learned from 1965.
Right.
And they still dropped the ball. And now you have 2020. And one of the statistics from the American Society of Newspaper Editors is that today across the country, 3.4% of newsroom employees are Black. 3.4%. I don't know what the new statistic is now, but I don't think it's jumped up that much higher. So, and I think the statistics are very similar for Latino, for Indigenous, Native American, and Asian AAPI reporters. And the numbers are still really small. We've made progress, but we still have a long way to go. And I thought the mea culpa that the Los Angeles Times wrote was beautiful, thorough, and magnificent and important that they did that. And I admire them. It was an act of courage. However, they recently had layoffs. And ironically, a lot of the people that were laid off happened to be Black and people of color, younger reporters. Right. Oh, and I do want to take a step back and say, I do want to acknowledge the LA Times had magnificent, wonderful, nuanced coverage by John H. Lee and other reporters who were freelancers that highlighted positive
during
moments.
1992.
Yeah, that highlighted positive moments between the Black and Korean American community. So for all the racist coverage that the LA Times did that sensationalized and fanned the flames of conflict between the Black and Korean communities, they also did publish a lot of really great articles, but I think it was too little too late at the time. And the thing about journalism is that it is an apprenticeship. You learn and grow as a journalist from your editor, from the veteran. I have learned and grown and become the way I have from the older people that shepherded my way through. So the problem now is with the economy, with layoffs, most of the younger, newer, newbie reporters, the rookies are people of color. So they're the first to get cut out. And that's a problem, because then we're not nurturing them and bringing them up. So,
and if they're freelancers, they don't have relationships with editors because they work all over the place. So it's not like you're constantly submitting to the same person, getting feedback, learning, getting tips. You're going from newsroom to newsroom. Maybe you do a piece or two here, a piece or two there, but there's not that building up of skills and abilities.
Yeah, and then you end up making the same mistakes because no one sees it. Because people need to see a pattern in your writing. And so ultimately, I do think we've made a lot of progress. I do think there's much more diversity behind the camera, behind the typewriter, the iPhone. But we still have a long way to go. And as a WGA member, I was on strike last year for several months, and I'm seeing a contraction in our industry as well, especially for diverse screenwriters. So it's a concern across all industries.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk to you about the stories we didn't get because we were getting these mainstream flawed stories. And one of the stories that we really don't hear about is what was going on in the Latinx community at the time. Obviously, your book is focused on the Korean American community. That is really your lens through this story. So you don't spend a lot of time on that. But I'm curious, are there good resources or is there good writing about what was going on there? Because I know that I know LA. I know that there is a huge Latinx community. I actually read a novel called All Involved by Ryan Gaddis that's about about 1992. It's a fictionalization, but it centers some Latino guys they're doing, it's sort of like The Purge. They're doing a revenge killing of another gang member because the night before, April 28th, one of their own had been killed. So it's sort of like they're going out in all of this chaos to avenge the death of their friend. That's the premise. But that book had always put the Latino experience kind of in my mind since I read it. Because the coverage was so Black versus Korean. And also, weirdly, the white perspective is missing oftentimes in this story, right? It's a weird thing because usually the white perspective is very clear. This is what's happening to white people right now. It's none of their business, but let me take you to Beverly Hills and let you know. So I'm kind of wondering in the work that you did, what you did see about mainly the Latinx community, but also we were just at USC and I'm thinking, what were these kids feeling when all of this is going around? Because that's sort of an island of white wealth in the middle of South Central Los Angeles, or South LA as they call it now.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And I do cover the Latinx community in my book. What I did was I also wanted to humanize all the communities. And I told you earlier that I focus on personal stories. So one of the stories I highlighted was the night before Edward J. Song Lee was killed, and his nickname was Eddie. Another Eddie was killed the night before, Eddie Travins. He was only 15 years old. He actually was learning, trying to get his driver's license. So he went out to practice his driving, and he was shot. And he died. And it's the most heartbreaking story. So I used his story to also talk about the youth, the Latinx youth that were caught up in the crossfire as well. And the other thing that I focus on is the stereotypes of the Latinos, because they were often referred to as looters. And all you ever saw was a Mexican American man or a Latino person carrying a giant TV set or a bed or something out the door. And the thing is that actually was not what was happening. That's a great sexy photo for for clickbait. It's sexy clickbait. But at the end of the day, the majority of the Latinos, the Latino community, they needed baby formula. They needed diapers. They needed water. They needed food. They needed milk. This was a matter of life and death because everything was shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And they were terrified, and we did not honor that. And instead the media said, oh, there, look at these, quote unquote, forgive me for saying these words, looters, thugs, look at these gang. They were immediately stereotyped. These were fathers. These
Mm-hmm.
were mothers. These were terrified grandmothers running out there getting basic supplies necessary for survival. So I talk about that. And then I talk about how with the Latino community, I think their community grew into parts of South Los Angeles and also
Mm-hmm.
in Koreatown. So I talk about how today, you also have a huge El Salvadorian, Guatemalan community in Koreatown, also in Compton. It's talk about that growth as well. And, so I quote a lot of professors and other people about what was going on. And one of the most beautiful stories was there was a Guatemalan immigrant who was caught at Florence in Normandy, and a Black preacher rescued
Mm.
him, and the two became best friends. The Black minister had been formerly incarcerated.
Yeah.
And he became a very famous minister who advocated for, prison reform, and, was looked up to a lot by the community. He very tragically died of leukemia the following year, and they were supposed to go back to the young man's country. They were going to go back to
Yeah.
Guatemala. So he ended up going to his funeral instead. So, I mean, these are the types of stories I wanted to highlight again to show that we also have the same stereotype. Oh, Latinos are anti-Black.
Right.
There's Black gangs against, the Mexican gangs, street gangs, and
Right.
things like that. And that's not the case. This was a beautiful friendship that formed.
Right.
Yeah, just so I think that like the Korean community, the Latino Latinx community had a very, very similar parallel issue
Right.
that was going on as well with the
Yeah.
Korean community at the time.
I want to talk about sort of how you as a writer approach telling these stories. Are there things that because you're writing for a younger audience, obviously you have to take that into account. What information do they already have? Like, how much teaching do you have to do? How much explaining versus how much do you present the information? In the scenes where we're dealing with Rodney King and the police officers who beat him, you present officer testimony. And how much were you thinking about, okay, I need to explain why this isn't what this person said shouldn't be taken at face value? Or how much do you trust that your readers will understand what Stacey Koon said is fucking bullshit? You know what I mean? So how are you thinking about that as an author, especially knowing that your audience might not have, years of experience of bullshit cops or years of experience of racism, right?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think part of it is because I'm a screenwriter and a novelist as well, because I've sold novels and I write for TV, I tend to approach things very cinematically and like a novel. So I love bookends. So I always love open bookends.
Yes.
And to me, the mic drops are the bookends. So I set up something at the beginning, and I trust the reader, no matter how old they are or how young they are, they can follow the through line and see where the mic drop is later. And the other thing too is you have to be careful as a nonfiction book author and as a journalist, whether or not you're writing an article, an adult nonfiction book, or something for young adults or for children, like with my children's picture books. I cannot editorialize too much. I can't come in and say, by the way, this was bullshit. I need to let the words speak for themselves. It's a very fine, it's a fine line, because if I editorialize too much, then I lose the integrity of the truth and the reporting, and allowing the reader to be, for example, the Vincent Chin book, I had to walk a very careful line because I wanted the reader to be a jury member. Would they have voted guilty or not guilty? And so I hoped with the context and the structure of how I told that story, I gave enough from the defense point of view and the prosecuting point of view that I trusted that the reader would walk away with a fair and just idea of how they would vote on the imaginary jury they were on. Same thing with the jury of the readers reading the coverage of the LAPD brutality beating case of Rodney King. A lot of it was through structure, because when I read the transcripts, I was screaming and waking up my husband in the middle of the night because I'd be working till 2 a.m. And so one of the things I did was when you read my book and you look at the structure and the bookends that I do, you actually do hear the Paula Yu editorial, or at least you can hear me. It's about show, don't tell. So for example, in my book, there's a moment where Officer Powell, Lawrence Powell, describes that he was scared to death on the night of March 3rd, 1991. He said Rodney King was a big man, very powerful arms, and he actually basically he used animal imagery. So Terry White, the district attorney, said, Rodney King, he deserves to be treated like a human being, didn't he? Yes, sir. He wasn't an animal, was he? And then Powell said, no, sir, just acting like one. Now, if I step in and say that is inherently racist, that is such a terrible thing for me to say, we lose the power and shock. That's and no matter how young you are, we are raised from birth. Well, hopefully, not everybody is, and that's a tragedy. That's a whole other podcast. But hopefully, if you are in a loving community that raises you to be compassionate and empathetic, you are empathetic towards all living creatures, whether it's animals, human beings, insects, whatever it is. So my reader knows that was not cool what he said, but. Right. The way I editorialize and provide context is if you go several pages later and you have Terry White is doing his final arguments for the jury before they have to go into seclusion to decide whether or not the LAPD officers are guilty. And he actually loses his emotion. He gets upset and he starts screaming at Lawrence Powell. And he says, he laughed. He's denying it. And he had to be ordered back. They said, Mr. White, you're out of line. So then Terry White apologizes, but then he says this. He goes, Terry White did not apologize for his anger directed at Lawrence Powell. And the quote that he says is, they treat him like an animal, yet the defending attorney, Michael Stone, does not want me to call his client, Lawrence Powell, a thug. Because when he did say, you're a thug, the other attorney was like, objection, can't say that. Right. But yet, didn't we read earlier that Powell could say, oh, Rodney King was acting like an animal? I still gasp. I feel horrible even saying that out loud. Yeah. Oh, it's horrible, right? So then Terry White ends his argument with, he tells Lawrence Powell, you are not a thug, but you are acting like one. Just like Mr. King wasn't an animal, but he was acting like one. And I think it's important for teenage readers to then, now you know how I feel. Right. About what Powell said earlier. And so that's how I contextualize and editorialize sometimes, because less is more, I think, in terms of laying that out. And also, too, I think with these books, I'm trying to teach teenagers how to read at a higher level. Yeah. How to read. It's about reading comprehension. It's about critical thinking skills. It's about analysis. Yeah. I'm not going to spoon feed you everything, just like I don't want to be spoon fed stuff. And
I think that's why I love your book so much, because even though I'm not necessarily your target audience, I don't feel like I'm being spoken down to, right? Like there's not very much in this book that I didn't know broad strokes, right? Like I knew a lot of the names. I was familiar with a lot of it because this also is like what I call, that meme, the Roman Empire thing, where it's like men think about, this is my Roman Empire.
Oh my
I think
gosh.
about the Watts. Yeah. I think about the 1992 rebellion too often. So like for me reading this, I wasn't surprised. Like I was yelling at my husband when we were doing the part with Judge Joyce Carlin. I was like, I literally can't believe what I'm about to read next. But I do not ever remember a time not knowing about this story. And yet still it surprises me and upsets me. But I think because you treat your reader with so much respect and you say you're smart enough to figure this out and you don't talk down to them, that while this is a book aimed at children, me, an adult who feels very familiar with this stuff, feels like this book is safe for me to read too, and I'm not going to be annoyed or patronized by you. And I think that's just so important, because I truly feel like this is the kind of book that I would have liked as a young person. Because a lot of the reason,
thank you.
I didn't read YA stuff as a kid is because it didn't exist in the ways that I wanted to, but also because some of the stuff that did exist felt so like juvenile, right? Like I'm a teenager. I want to be an adult. I want to read about adult things.
I appreciate that. I do want to add that as a Korean American woman too, and when you are a Black or Korean American or writer of color, there is an extra burden on us to be real, because here's the thing, if I editorialize too much, would it be like, oh, she's on a soapbox, I don't trust her because of course she's going to say this because she's Korean. I mean, to give you an example, when the Atlanta spa shootings happened in March of 2021, a lot of Korean American reporters and Asian American reporters were not allowed to go cover it because they were told, oh, you might let your personal biases get in the way and you'll be too sensitive and you won't write something objective or fair. And I'm sitting here going, you never say that to white reporters when they go to report on a white mass shooter.
Right. Or even like the way we saw reporting on Trump. They said the same thing to Black people during the lead up to Trump. You can't cover Trump because you're too biased. It's like, well, no, he's just super racist. That's not my fault. Can I please still cover it?
How about he just, exactly. So there's an extra burden on us in a way to prove that, no, we're not being, but then at the same time, you can tell the way I actually do editorialize is when you read the author's note to the Vincent Chin book, From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, when you read the author's note for Rising from the Ashes, you know how I feel. That's my editorial mic drop. I can be free in my author's note to talk about my personal journey, So once at that point, the reader trusts me because they're like, okay, she didn't pander. She didn't present a biased or, specific angle. And now I get to see how she feels. So it's a little bit like I'm having a conversation with the reader. Hey, here's how I felt after I read and wrote what I did. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so sad because we're like so close to running out of time, but I feel like I could talk to you about this for like a week and not get bored or tired. But I do want to ask you about if there's anything that is not in the book that you wish could have been or wish could be.
Definitely. There are several things. Everybody I talked to, I interviewed Representatives Andy Kim and Marilyn Strickland, and their stories were amazing. Marilyn Strickland is a Black Korean biracial congresswoman. And of course, we know Andy Kim was the representative who was on his hands and knees picking up garbage at the Capitol building. They gave me wonderful quotes, but their stories about their lives growing up, wish I could have included that. I also wish I could have included, the last two stories I will say is I was in Atlanta for a book event. So I went and visited all the spas where the killings happened. And I interviewed Robert Peterson, who was thanked in the acknowledgments. Robert Peterson is the Black Korean son of Young A.U., who was the 8th and final person killed in the spa shootings. His father is Black and his mom was Korean. And we had lunch and he took me to all the spas and we did a moment of silence, and his story was so beautiful. And he talked to me about growing up, in Atlanta and watching the riots when he was 13, and his perspective as a Black Korean man was so moving to me. And he has a tattoo of his mother's name in Korean with a cartoon of kimchi jjigae stew because that was their favorite meal that they used to make together. And I wish I had included that. And the final thing I will say is Soo Myung-ko was the Korean immigrant store owner who had to stay up all night with a gun defending his stall at the Compton market. And his famous quote to me was, "America has let me down," because he loved America. He came out here, American dream, and he was so shattered after that. And what blew me away was after that, he healed and he still loved America. He hiked all the mountains across America. He's an avid hiker. He hiked everywhere. He just was so, I still love America. And 1 year after I interviewed him, and this was in the early days of the pandemic, he died from COVID-19. So his family requested that I play my violin at his funeral. And because I'm a professional when I'm not writing, I play weddings. I'm a professional freelance violinist. So I played Arirang, which is the Korean folk song. And it's basically thematic of one day Korea will be reunited. And I also played his other favorite song. And I ended the service with this song, which was John Denver's Country Road, because he loved that song. And to him, America was the lyrics from that song. So I wrote in my book, and unfortunately we had to take it out, but I wrote "He Is Home." And I don't want to start crying, but those are and there's many, many more stories I could tell you, but I think all of that. And I do just want to add that talking with the Lee family, the way they had to relive their pain, same with Latasha Harlan's family, same with the King family. I could go back and play with my cats and move on with my life. I ruined their day every time I had to talk to them because I had to make them relive the worst moments of their lives. And I had to, reintroduce them to their trauma. when I interviewed them, there was a lot of tears, a lot of joy, and a lot of anger. And what I realized was they weren't remembering what happened. And the same thing happened when I interviewed people for Vincent Chin. They were reliving what had happened. And I also am the first person to interview the man who killed Vincent Chin in 40 years since Michael Moore met him. So I met him at his home. And I will say that meeting everybody, and I will say with the Ronald Ebens Vincent Chin interview that I did, and with my experience with Sun Jadu's family, it made me realize that compassion, justice, and anger are not mutually exclusive. I can be angry that justice was not served. I can be angry for what happened, and I can be angry for the death, the innocent lives lost of Vincent Chin and Latasha Harlins. But I can also still have compassion and empathy because we are not defined by our last bad deed. We should not be we should not be judged by the last bad thing we did. We should be judged by what we did afterwards. And I will say that I did reach out to Sun Jadu's family respectfully several times, and they said no because they want to protect their privacy and they want to be at peace. And so I write about that in the book as well. And, there are a lot of things that will be unresolved for everybody on both sides. And it breaks my heart. So I think these books are ultimately heartbreaking for me, but they also bring me joy when I meet the loved ones who are left behind. It's really my love letter to the loved ones left behind, and a love letter of solidarity between my Korean American family and community and the Black community and their families. It just means it is an honor to try to write about both our communities. And I hope teens can walk away from that and learn that we cannot be in an echo chamber where all we do is talk about our own struggles. We have to be there, support, and listen to other communities as well. That's the only way we're going to make a step forward.
Yeah. We're going to do sort of a hard shift into the favorite Stacks questions that are more about you and your process. The first one is, you mentioned you write at 2 a.m, or you were reading and working at 2 a.m. How do you like to write? How often, like music or no music, snacks and beverages? Can you kind of tell us about how you write your work?
Okay, first of all, I will say that behind me on our video screen are my closet doors. We recently had them remodeled. They are 3 sliding glass doors, and my husband had the brilliant idea of frosting the glass. So I use it as my whiteboard. So I have, so it's blank right now, but later it will be filled with my scrawls. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I forgot I've written on these closet doors. So it's like a beautiful mind with Russell Crowe.
Oh my gosh. I love that.
What did I write? So I have that. That's how, so basically the way I write is I employ both journalism, novel writing, and TV screenwriting techniques. So for me, it is about character, emotion, and voice. So oftentimes I will just write from the voice of the character because I need the voice and I need the tone and the character. I'll do that for a little bit, basically free write. Then after that, once I've gotten the voice, I go back and I think about the idea and I go through a pitch process where I figure out the beginning, middle, and end. And I write and I go from the scribblings on my whiteboard or I also handwrite. So I have these notebooks that I write in all the time. No one can see it, but I'll show you my little notebooks.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Got
so
it. Like little notebooks.
Yeah. And I carry with me everywhere. And, and then eventually it will all morph into a proper outline, very detailed, 10 to 12, 20 pages where I have 2 or 3 paragraphs describing what happens in each paragraph. Right. And then I hit the ground running and I start writing. And that's what I do. So a lot of my writing takes months to do, but once I start writing, it's like just several weeks. The actual writing goes by very quickly, and I tend to overwrite in nonfiction because it's better to have it's better to have 3 quotes about one fact, and then I can go back and say this is the best quote than to add, and I will say that my nonfiction tends to be very long. I will never tell anybody, especially my editor, because I don't want him to faint, but I will never tell anyone what the original word count was for the Rising from the Ashes or the Vincent Chin book, but it was Lord of the Rings, like all 3. It was as long as the Lord of the Rings, all 3 trilogies. So that's what I do. And I do want to say too that, I never procrastinate because I don't believe in procrastination. What I believe in is when there are days that you don't want to write, it's a left brain, right brain thing. It's hard sometimes to write. So then I use the left brain, the analytical side. So if I can't write, I'll reread a book or I'll watch a TV show and study the structure, or, you know what I mean? So, or I'll just rest my brain because it's the Instapot. It's simmering. on low for 8 hours. So every day, even if I don't actually write, I go to bed happy knowing that I did write because I read a book or I took notes or I edited or I revised or I watched something similar to what I'm writing that inspired me.
Do you have snacks and beverages in your process?
Yes, I have, coffee. Once I start writing though, kind of the world disappears.
Got it.
So I actually don't eat. And like there was a time when I was writing the LA book, I actually didn't eat or drink, I think, for like 10 straight hours. It was my husband knocked on the door and he's like, he thought I was dead. He's like, are you okay? And I'm like, oh, it's 10 o'clock at night. So, but I tend not to eat while I write because I don't want to ruin my pretty keyboard and with oily fingertips. Fair. Yeah. So, but I do take breaks. And when I do, I'll just make a snack and, chocolate or maybe a glass of wine late at night. I won't lie. And I'll watch, and I always watch Food Network. For some reason, I have to watch a cooking show.
I love that. Okay. What's a word you can never spell correctly on the first try?
I would place third in the Connecticut State Spelling Bee in the second.
Oh, you're one of those.
So there is a word that I can never. Oh, it's accommodate. That word.
That's one of my words.
My spell check goes. That's the word. Accommodate. Always.
Yeah. Too many freaking consonants. Okay. Last question. If you could have one person, dead or alive, read this book, Rising from the Ashes, who would you want it to be? Sort of a tough one.
You're going to make me cry because I would want Eddie, Tasha, and Glenn to read this because I wish I got to know them. I mean, my book opens, it's not a spoiler, but it opens where I write out their full names. I say, meet, Rodney Glenn King, meet Edward J. Song Lee, meet Latasha Levon Harlins. And at the end, I bookend it, but I end with the names that they went by with their loved ones, which were Eddie, Tasha, and Glenn. So on my journey, I felt like I had become, at some point, I actually feel like I actually hung out with them. That's how alive they became for me. I love Eddie, Tasha, and Glenn. I love you very much. I love your families, and I hope you rest in peace and rest in power. Thank you. Sorry.
So beautiful. It's okay. Everyone, this has been a conversation with Paula Yu. Rising from the Ashes, as you're listening, is out now in the world. You can get it wherever you get your books. If you've got young people in your life, I highly, highly recommend it for them. This is, again, like I said before, a book that I wish I could have read as a teenager because I know I would have just loved it because I loved it as an adult. So that's a good indication. Paula, thank you so much for being here. This was a delight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And I really thank you for not only the opportunity, but for what you all do in terms of advocacy for our young people and, for always promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, which have unfortunately become, people have tried to turn them into bad words and they're not. And I'm very proud of what you do. So thank you.
Thank you. And everyone else, we will see you in the stacks. All right, y'all, that does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you to Paula Yu for being my guest. I'd also like to thank Naomi Duttweiler for helping to make this conversation possible. Remember, the Stacks Book Club pick for May is No Name in the Street by James Baldwin. We will be discussing that book on May 29th with Yadon Israel. If you love the show and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack and subscribe to my newsletter at tracythomas.substack.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, be sure to leave a rating and a review. For more from the Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, and at The Stacks Pod _ on Twitter. And you can check out my website at thestackspodcast.com. This episode of The Stacks was edited by Christian Duenas with production assistance from Lauren Tyree. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tigirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.